Hi, I'm Krutika, and today's conversation is with my dear friend Rakhi Jogya. I've known Rakhi since our teenage years, and in our conversation, she bravely shares her journey of being diagnosed with mouth cancer, not once, but twice. She opens up about the emotional and physical challenges of surgery and recovery, from the hour-long struggles with simple meals to recording voice notes for her children before surgery. But this isn't just a journey about cancer. It's about resilience, self-discovery, and making bold life choices. Rakhi talks about her recent decision to take a career break to focus on family and well-being. Her honest reflections on learning to prioritize what truly matters and embracing uncertainty make this conversation really touching and inspiring. A very warm welcome to my bestie, Rakhi. How are you today?
Oh, I'm great, Krutika. Thanks for having me on. And it's so lovely to speak to you on your podcast.
I know I'm excited for the conversation. I don't know about you, Rakhi, but it's freezing cold where I am today.
Yeah, it is. And there's so much ice about, but it looks very pretty outside. So I'm actually enjoying being in the warmth and looking out the window where it's all frozen and white.
Oh, beautiful. Now, I'm going to dive straight into it. Obviously, I said I've known you for a really long time, in fact, since I was a teenager, but the listeners will be hearing from you from the very first time. And I often find it interesting how people introduce themselves. So I'm going to hand over the mic to you. I mean, how would you introduce yourself?
I definitely think this was a bit of a hard one. And I feel like I've not had to introduce myself outside of a work setting in a really long time. But I guess similar to you, I would say I'm a British Indian girl who grew up in Wembley, got married, moved out of Wembley, and I'm a mum of two.
Oh, that's amazing. And I love that you've kind of condensed that into something that's really important to you. The fact that you mentioned your family and very much like the way you've introduced yourself, I tend to place so much emphasis on my work and introducing myself in the work context. So I love that you've mentioned being a mum of two. Your kids are absolutely adorable. I mean, growing up, what were the sorts of dreams and aspirations you had? Obviously having a family, was that part of the dream and aspiration?
Yeah, definitely. And I think I was thinking about this the other day, and beyond what a lot of, I think, young girls dream about, which is probably getting through your education, getting a job, getting married, having a family. I don't really know if my dreams went much beyond that, to be honest. I think sometimes when you and I have spoken, we talk a lot about doing good, something that gives you heartfelt or lasting gratification, something that makes someone else happy and also makes you happy. And I've always wanted to do something like this. And I think some might say it's wishful thinking, but I don't know if something like that exists out there, but I really hope that there might be.
That's lovely the way that you've put it, and so honest as well, that when you're little, beyond sort of just thinking about having that good education, having the family, whether we think any further of that. And I must agree, like, growing up for me as well, yes, I had the ambition to get my qualifications, get those grades. But do you know what? In the most part, I think a lot of people are just figuring things out and discovering their dreams. And I'm sure that changes as you sort of get older as well.
Yeah, so I think I remember one time when I was younger, a relative had asked me, who's your idol? And for anyone that knows me, I was actually raised by my paternal grandma. And I actually said, I think she's my idol. I'm not really into, super famous celebrity figures. And know that my grandma always had, like, the best intention for, everyone around her. Uh, and I do aspire to be like half the amazing woman that she was.
Yeah, that's really beautifully put, Rocky. And I actually had the honor of meeting your grandma multiple occasions, obviously visiting your house. She was always there. She was an absolutely incredible woman. And having known you for so many years, I can definitely say that you are more than half the woman that your grandma was. And I know she's sadly passed away, but it's great that you've sort of referred to her in this conversation because I know just how influential she was to you. Now, I know for our conversation, there's a specific aspect of your journey that we're going to come on to discuss. And I'm so proud of the way that you've handled this aspect of your journey. And I want you to be able to share this honestly. You've obviously had in the last couple of years a health journey that you've been on around your mouth cancer. And when we hear the C word, it can sort of bring up a real fear response. And we always think doom and gloom. But can you just walk us through what what you went through when you discovered that you had been diagnosed with mouth cancer.
Yeah. So the medical term of the cancer I had was called mucoepidermoid carcinoma. And I was firstly diagnosed just after I turned 30. So at the time, I was actually living in the States. My dentist there had spotted a growth on the roof of my mouth. And it's not something that I'd ever noticed. It's not somewhere where you pay a whole lot of attention to, really. I was referred to a specialist quite quickly, actually. So I underwent like a CT scan, and I had a small surgery to have it removed. It was definitely a bit of a, nerve-wracking time for me, especially having a young kid. I had my first kid by that time. I remember being on my way to IKEA in the US and crying whilst I, was sharing the news with my brother and my sister-in-law. I was thankful to have it been dealt with, at the time, and I thought it was only a blip. Even the doctors thought I was a anomaly case. I wasn't the typical person who you'd associate with this type of cancer. It would usually be older men who have a history of smoking. So that was the first time I had it. Then at 35, when my family and I were back in the UK, I now had my second kid too. It reappeared. I remember it was around the end of November, early December, when I noticed a smaller growth than the first time. And it wasn't painful, but it persisted for a couple of weeks. So after going to the GP and being referred to a specialist, I had another CT scan, I had an MRI, and a biopsy. And then I was diagnosed with the same thing again, mucoepidermoid carcinoma. This was just before Christmas, and I remember being an absolute mess, especially because it was a recurrent thing. You always end up like doubting yourself, thinking, should I have done something different, something more? But my consultant had reassured me that it was a low grade nature. So there wasn't a risk of any spread, but a more invasive surgery was required. Given this was a recurrent lesion, the consultant wanted to ensure that he did a good job so it didn't reappear again. Hearing all the scenarios was definitely really scary for me. There was the scenarios like were things like potential hole from my mouth to my nose, potential of my voice becoming more nasal, and the potential of needing like a skin graft. Those are just, to name some of the few.
Wow, that does sound like quite a life-changing experience, particularly the surgeries that you've mentioned. What sort of went through your mind around hearing the word, oh, you've got to have a surgery? Because I guess that can be quite daunting. Can you paint us a bit of a picture around that?
Yeah, I think it was, just thinking about, the people around you and maybe some of the changes or adaptations you might have to make. I think those were some of the like kind of direct thoughts that went in my mind. Obviously, like my kids, they're so young. Like, what if it's something more sinister, before knowing the full picture, I think. But then obviously, like step by step, when I had those answers, I think that definitely helped provide reassurance. I think you always need the time to digest it. I think sometimes you can have an immediate reaction, but when you think a bit more like logically, practically, like I think that definitely like helps. You do need to just take the time to absorb and think it through properly.
Yeah, and it's great that you mention that, right? Like we can often have knee-jerk reactions to certain things we're told, and it's great that you're sort of focusing on, right, actually you needed to break it down and have a moment, have a pause. And can I just ask, are you sort of over the worst of it?
I don't know, to be honest. Like I think I have my moments still. I don't know if that part of my life is it still impacts me. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like, oh, maybe it doesn't, and I'm like over it. I don't even think about it, and but maybe indirectly or subconsciously, it still does. It's a bit of a
Yeah.
tricky one.
No, I can sense it. I can sense it in your sort of voice as well. Often when we go through something traumatic, having to speak about it and relive those moments, it can be quite unnerving. So thank you for honestly sharing that. I mean, what were some of the challenges that you faced through uncovering that you had this type of mouth cancer and obviously the recovery process?
Yeah. So a wide chunk from the roof of my mouth to the back of my throat, almost near to my spine. and my right side tonsil was removed. I was relieved a hole from my mouth to my nose wasn't made. The surgeon did everything possible within safe limits to remove the cancer completely, but preserve as much of the tissue as possible. And, from the detailed discussion that I had with the consultant, there was a careful balance to be struck, especially as the tumor had reoccurred from a previous operation before I was even referred to him. I was given a temporary healing plate as well. So it's a bit like retainers that I ended up wearing for just under about 4 weeks or so. I remember when I was eating porridge on the first day after my surgery, it took me more than an hour to, just get through like a little bit of breakfast, a little bit of porridge. Swallowing water was like difficult. I remember once the general anesthetic had worn off, which was after like more than a day or so, I really had to like psych my body up for each swallow. I had my surgery on a Wednesday, and the Friday and Saturday of that week were probably the hardest. The following week on the Monday and the Tuesday, I think I started to also notice that my tongue was feeling irritated. It was quite sensitive. And a message from my consultant confirmed that he would have expected the tongue to play up a little bit because of some peeling at the back of the tongue that he had to do, I think. They had to get very close, I think it was to the lingual nerve, which is the nerve to the tongue. So on top of this as well, I had like metal clips on that healing plate, which was scratching, I think, on my tongue as well. And due to the small amount I could open my mouth, it all had like, impact on my jaws and everywhere as well. I don't know if me shaking was visible, but I felt whenever I'd be removing the healing plate to give it a clean, which would reveal the hole in my mouth as well, I was quite shaky at those times. And although the painkillers were a huge help, I'd often cry through my meals in the first week. But I was fortunate, I think, definitely after a month post my surgery, my recovery, my healing was going well. It wasn't 100% still, but I couldn't, like, say, for example, bite into a burger or something. But I was fortunate enough to no longer need the healing plate, and my voice was pretty much back to normal, and no one would have really known what had happened. I think although my voice initially sounded a bit off due to the healing plate and the nature of where the surgery was conducted and the recovery itself, like a month and a half down the line, I was back to my old self. There were definitely times where the area where the surgery was performed felt a little drier as well, due to the scar tissue that was developing in that area. And I think maybe some words that I said maybe to me sounded a little off, but I think that was probably more me getting conscious. And I think I used to get conscious as well. If people asked me to repeat myself, I'd be like, oh, is that because of the surgery or something? Or am I not sounding normal? I remember before the surgery as well. So maybe on a road trip to Leicester, I was singing Whitney Houston's I Will Always Love You at the top of my lungs and thinking, oh, is this going to be the last time I can sing like that? And I don't think I've attempted to sing it at the top of my lungs how I did that day, but maybe I'll have to give it a go. Maybe after this interview.
I was going to say, do you want to do it on the interview?
Yeah, not on the interview
Hidden
though.
talents, Rakhi. Well, firstly, the sort of symptoms and post-surgery kind of things that you had to deal with, the difficulty in swallowing, the tongue being irritated, the metal clips. I mean, it all sounds really painful.
Oh, I think it was definitely the hardest. Yeah, I think the not being able to eat properly, not being able to swallow.
Yeah, yeah. So what I'm going to ask a bit of a light-hearted question actually. So you mentioned it took you an hour to have your first meal. That was the porridge that you had post-surgery. Were there foods that you missed in particular during your healing process?
I think I mentioned the burger.
Yes, you did. You did.
Not being able to like bite into something because of the like not being able to open your jaw. I think I just had to focus on the softer kind of foods. It's like when you have like not exactly the same as when you have braces if you're younger, if you're a teenager and have them tightened and you have to eat the soft foods. It was definitely much different to that because of the surgery and the pain. People having braces can relate in terms of at the time you have to eat softer foods. Yeah, I just had to change your ways for a little bit, don't you?
And it's great that you've shown that kind of courage to adapt and, tweak things in your everyday sort of food consumption to manage that difficult period. Just
Mhm.
coming on to the sort of sources of strength and support that you would have had during this period. Who and what was your biggest sources of strength and support?
So definitely my husband. I know he was, this was all emotionally quite hard on him too. But he really was my rock, and he's been so supportive throughout. My employer and my manager at the time, they were really great as well. They really understood the recovery time I needed. My close family and my friends, definitely you, Krutika, who I could confide in. So during the first round, when I was in the US, the only person I shared the news with outside of my husband was my brother and my sister-in-law. I didn't want to alarm anyone else, given that we were so far away. I felt like I could just, we could deal with it ourselves, it'll be fine. But then the second time around in 2022, I shared the news with really close family and friends. Some of them I shared the news with after the surgery, and everyone, I think, understood, the initial space I needed to digest this big bit of news and the recovery time. And when they've always been there when I've needed them. And I think it might have been a bit selfish of me, that people might have wanted to check in on me after the surgery, but I'm okay with that. It was actually quite nice not to be inundated with messages during that time as well.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. Sometimes when we go through something as traumatic as this, we actually don't really want to tell everyone because, like you say, you might get the influx of messages. You don't know how people are going to react. They might be alarmed. It was the word that you used. So I think we need to embrace being okay with keeping information for ourselves. There are certain things we might not be ready to share with someone, but we might be ready at a later point in time, and that should be absolutely okay. It shouldn't be an issue. And if it is, it's more a reflection on the person that's made it an issue rather than you withholding that for yourself.
I absolutely agree with that. And I think the only other people, like my young kids, they were also very, very sweet. They would check in on me when they would get back from school, making sure I was okay as well. And I tried to be as open and honest with them, and talk to them about what was happening before the surgery as well. I remember I also tried to make little voice notes for them before the surgery, because obviously I didn't know what was going to happen to my voice and how much I'd be able to speak. So I wanted to have little notes that they could hear if I wasn't able to speak properly, so that they could hear some of the daily things that I would say to them or ask them to do, just the routine things. But luckily, I don't think I needed to use them too much.
One of the other things you mentioned in terms of those that were a great support for you was your employer at the time as
Mm,
well. I'm aware that recently you've taken a bit of a career break.
yeah.
Can you just walk us through what led you to make that decision?
Yeah, so honestly here as well, I think it was, there was multiple factors. First was that the new job that I had started just at the beginning of last year, it just wasn't the right fit. And I just needed more flexibility in my life. My kids are getting older and I just wanted to be around a little bit more. I could tell, just from a few months into my new role, that I wasn't exercising enough. I felt we weren't eating well. And nowadays, I feel like that you get so much information overload. You're always bombarded with things about healthy eating or clean eating to prevent illnesses. And as much as all that stuff really fascinates me, it also frightens me. Like I think with my previous health issues, I just want to ensure that I'm doing the best in my ability to nourish my growing kids. And I knew just both me and my husband working full time wasn't sustainable. When we were growing up, I felt like, you always had extended family around. It wasn't always common for both parents to work. And I do feel, there are a lot of people feeling the same way that I did. And I would love to see organizations do more to bring in more flexible roles, not only for parents, but for others. I do feel like society isn't what it used to be 100 years ago. And I think COVID really has opened our eyes to this and has helped us assess what's important to us.
That is so well put. And it's great that your decision has been led by what is important to you and the values that you have. And obviously, the experiences with your health have clearly influenced also the way that you kind of want to lead your life going forward. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's been so much kind of happening in life. I definitely feel like this decade has taught me a lot. So yeah, I think that's definitely helped me reassess, prioritize what's important to me, and I'm okay with the decision that I made. You know, it might be a temporary decision, and I think yeah, that change might be exciting in the future as well. I think I'm open to it, and I want to embrace it.
Absolutely. So, what's been the most challenging part of making this decision to take a bit of a break?
So there are definitely days where I feel like maybe talent, and by that I mean like, you know, my skills or having been, you know, having gone through my education, I feel like, oh, is it going wasted? But then I remember, you know, why I made the decision, due to prioritizing my family right now. And like I said, I'm hopeful it might allow me to explore or find something with greater meaning. Who knows? I might want to go back into studying or a totally new career path. I think it's the not knowing where life will take us that might frighten us, but I have to remind myself that it could be exciting and a bit of an adventure too. And then maybe I'll have another story to share with you, Krutika.
And that will be absolutely fantastic. And that's the other thing, right? Like, so many of us live life with a predetermined timeline of events that often come not from what we want, but often what society has dictated, because that's always the done way. So the fact that you've even made this brave move to take a bit of a pause, to reassess what your priorities are, I think that deserves a lot of applause. It's great that you're embracing that as your journey.
Thanks. Yeah, it's definitely a tough one. You definitely have lots of questions, and you know, you have self doubts. But I think the bigger picture is what I'm learning to accept.
Yeah, and acceptance is great. Your journey has obviously been really incredible. What have you learned through your experiences?
So I think I've learned that I have empathy. I think I can easily be touched by different stories. I can have a cry. But I think I've also learned that I am quite strong at the same time.
I don't think empathy is something that comes so easily to everyone. And I know individuals that go through certain traumatic experience, it almost feels like we are more likely to have empathy for others because we've experienced something so traumatic. So maybe we're a little bit more willing to kind of just put ourselves in somebody else's shoes. And resilience, that's a really powerful one. For anyone that's listening to this, facing their own battles, what advice or perspective would you give to them?
So I think first and probably most important one, if you notice any changes in your body that persist for more than 2 or 3 weeks, don't be lazy or scared. Just go and get it checked out. Like I think that's the most important. Then I think you hear this quite often. You do you. I know it's easy to start thinking, oh, what will this person think and what will this person say? But it really doesn't matter. You have to look out for yourself. I think definitely talk to people who you know will understand and offer words of advice. I think that's really helped me in my journey, and it still does, even when I'm going through other things. I think it's okay to feel a bit low sometimes. You just have to let it pass and just feel the feels.
Do you know, that's some really great wisdom that you've imparted there. I particularly love the you do you, because so much of how we live our lives sometimes, and it comes back to the point we were saying earlier, it might not be you doing you. You're perhaps following a predetermined pathway that society, family, or cultures have actually thrust upon you. So that's really, really impactful advice. Just to wrap up then, my final question for you: what journey are you on right now?
So I actually don't know. I don't think I'm on a journey right now. I'm just trying to be here, trying to be present for myself and my family. And at this stage, I don't actually have an end goal or a destination to reach. So I think that's what I'll say to your final question.
Do you know what? And I love that. It's also realizing that we don't have to always have an end goal. And you're here, you're present, and that's all that we can be as human beings. So thank you so much, Rakhi, for sharing your incredible journey.
Thank you, Krutika. I loved it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Journeys with Krutika. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and share. I'd love for you to hit the follow button wherever you get your podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you have a journey that you want to share, email me at journeyswithkrutika@gmail.com or reach out via my socials. I'm on Instagram and TikTok. Just search Journeys with Krutika because your journey is extraordinary.